Hello, everyone. Let's get this party started. How are we doing today? Go ahead and hit me up in the chat box. Let me know how things are going. I also sent a message to everybody. I was supposed to just send that privately. So you probably just got a message in chat, like, what is that all about? But I was answering a specific question. Yeah, we are just trying to make it through here today, aren't we? Right, holding on to the end of the year. We're hoping 2021 is better than 2020. I feel like my my planner really trolled me this year pretty hard. 2020, best year ever. It's like false advertising. Yeah, I hope you guys are having an opportunity to enjoy the holidays if you're celebrating and unwinding a little bit this year. Cool, I've got a lot of people here today. This was very highly attended today. If you have questions, go ahead and just fire them off in the chat box. I will do my best to keep up with some of them, but there are a lot of you. If you were signed up for free GMAT prep hour as of yesterday afternoon, I sent an email to whatever email address you signed up with, and I asked if anyone had any problems they'd like to look at, as long as the problems came from an official free resource or on a Manhattan Prep resource. And I actually got a handful of responses, so thank you so much for responding. And I have decided that today I'm going to give the people what they want and respond to some questions that came in. Two main question types that came in were related to critical reasoning and data sufficiency. So we're going to go spend probably half the time on each of those today. And then before we actually get started, I just did want to remind everyone that you have some other options for free prep through Manhattan Prep. Come check out one of our trial classes. Just show up to session 1. We would love to see you in session 1. And then it's up to you if you want to stick around and hang out with us for the rest of the course. Or you can get started on our Interact modules. Interact is 36 or so interactive lessons online, taught by an online instructor, and you get the first 5 or so of them for free if you want to try it out and see if they work for you. So let's get into the content for the day. So I think I'm going to spend about half the time today talking about critical reasoning, because I had a handful of questions related to the process for tackling critical reasoning questions. And to be honest, it's just been a while since I've done these here, so I figured this would be a good time to do it. I also had a handful of questions about data sufficiency, and really, like, those were the only question types people wanted to talk about. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to look at some questions that, like, specific questions that came in, that got emailed to me, and we'll try to extract some like slightly bigger lessons from those. So we'll start with critical reasoning. There are some other free GMAT prep hour videos on critical reasoning, especially on assumption family questions, strength and weaken questions, evaluate and argument questions. And I have one of these from a while ago. And I know Reed Arnold just did one a couple months ago. And so these are worth checking out too. If you're watching on YouTube right now, just go ahead and click the channel and just scroll through these and take a look at some of these other videos in here. There are additional critical reasoning videos on other topics, such as like the inference questions or, you know, draw a conclusion in critical reasoning, and you can find those in the channel as well. All right, so let's remind ourselves of how we want to tackle most critical reasoning arguments, okay? For me, the best thing, my best advice to students is, when you're tackling a critical reasoning argument, it is essential that we can isolate what the conclusion of the argument is, and we can isolate what the support for that conclusion is, all right? So the conclusion is always what we call like a claim or a guess or a prediction or a belief, but it's always something that the author of the argument believes to be true, and it's never a fact. And so we can think of the conclusion of the claim as the what the person believes. Okay, what does this person believe? That's the conclusion. The other half of the critical reasoning argument is going to be why that person believes the what. All right, we call this the support or the premise of the argument. And there can sometimes be multiple premises, but if something explains why the author believes something, it's going to be a premise. What that person believes is the conclusion of the claim. So let's take a look at a sample one of these. JD, that's a good question. I think I can rope that question into the first question we look at today. So here's an argument: no athletes under the age of 14 can qualify for Countrywide Olympic team. And therefore, Adrian can't qualify for Countrywide Olympic team. So what we have here, what the arguer ultimately believes is Adrian, poor Adrian, she can't qualify for this Olympic team. Okay, and so when I take notes in critical reasoning, or when I advise my students to start taking notes, I ask them, let's just put the conclusion or the what to the right side. Okay, and that's going to leave room on the left side for the reason why Adrian can't qualify for the Olympic team in this problem. So the reason that Adrian can't qualify is apparently because no athletes under the age of 14 can qualify. And so the way that an argument is structured on the GMAT is because of this information over here, the author believes this. And so oftentimes the word therefore kind of shows the connection between the premise and the conclusion. You can think of the word so, right? No athletes under the age of 14 can qualify, so Adrian can't qualify. And so these are the pillars of a critical reasoning argument. Now, oftentimes what we need to do in these problems is look at this gap, okay, between premise and conclusion. Because in any find the assumption, strengthen the argument, weaken the argument, or evaluate the argument question, there has to be something not quite airtight about the logic here, okay? So in this argument, it really seems as if there's a leap in logic here, okay? What are we assuming to arrive at this conclusion here? Let me know in chat. Yeah, thanks for all these responses. And everyone's basically like sending me the exact same thing. So it appears as if this argument's not very complex. And sometimes calling out an assumption is the easy work. Sometimes finding the assumption is really tough. Okay, but we do want to figure out, hey, what is the gap here? The premise is about athletes under the age of 14. All of a sudden, the conclusion is about Adrian. Like, what if Adrian's 18? What if Adrian's 25? Right? Oh, so the unwritten information in this, I should pick purple, but I don't know which color purple is. I'm colorblind. The unwritten information in this argument is that Adrian is under 14. And now the conclusion is a lot more airtight, okay? So in any critical reasoning argument, that's an assumption family question. That is, find the assumption, strengthen, weaken, or evaluate the argument. We need to kind of figure out what's missing in the argument, and the answer choice will have something very much to do with that missing information, okay? So we don't attack the premise, okay? We're gonna believe that, yes, there's this rule in Countrywide that says, like, no athletes under 14 can qualify. And we're not gonna attack this, but we're gonna attack the logic that the arguer is using to draw this conclusion from just this. And there always needs to be something missing. Yeah, and another thing kind of came in. This is an interesting potential, extra question about this argument. Yeah, the premise says no athletes under the age of 14. But what if Adrian's like a non-athlete who's under the age of 14? Can she qualify for the Olympics? I would say, like, Technically, yes, though I'd imagine there's some like weird definition that happens in there. Like if you qualified for an Olympic team, you're definitely an athlete. So that would be something very picky to point out. And I think if that's the way you're kind of like looking at an argument here, that's going to pay off for you in the long run. All right, let's go take a look at one of the problems that came in via email in the last day or so. I'll give you 2 minutes to think through this, and then we'll break it down together. If you have an answer, just feel free to send it to only the panelists. Don't blast it to everybody in chat. No spoilers, please. It's been 1:15. All right, that has been 2 minutes. It looks like I know I've seen answers for four of the letters, and at least someone said they were considering the 5th letter. So this is a good one to get started with. Let's go ahead and just clear the answer choices from the screen so we have a little bit of room to outline what's happening in this argument. So first thing we want to do in a critical reasoning question is just take a look at what kind of question type it is. All right, so I'm going to look just underneath the argument itself and go to the question stem. Which of the following, if true, strengthens the claim made by the advertising executive? So in this problem, I know I'm going to have to strengthen what the advertising executive ultimately wants to say. All right, I'm going to strengthen the what. Okay, this question is from one of our resources. This is a Manhattan Prep question. I think all the critical reasoning questions are going to be from Manhattan Prep, and I think data sufficiency questions are from free official software stuff. All right, so we see strengthen the claim. What we want to do here is go find the claim. Okay, so take a moment and try to figure out what, remember the what is the advertising executive's claim or conclusion? What does this person believe? And here it is. Television commercials are now much less cost effective than they used to be. Yeah. We got to be a little careful. It's not that commercials are not cost effective. They're not cost effective at all. We got to get rid of them. It's just that they're less cost effective. There's a comparison between like how cost effective these commercials are now and what they used to be like. Okay, so I am going to jot this down on the right side. I'm just going to say, now the television commercials are less cost effective. And so we need the support, okay? We need to kind of arrive at this conclusion, or the advertising executive is arriving at that conclusion by using some support. So let's go try to track down what this person's using as support while I figure out what's going on in the Q&A box. All right, well, I think there's actually a couple pieces of support here. So one piece of support is that 75% of these 10 million households, so 7.5 million households, fast forward through commercials. At least one commercial every 30-minute program. So we've got millions of households fast forwarding through television commercials now. What does that mean? Well, then the advertising executive kind of uses this idea to arrive at this idea. And this means those commercials aren't as widely watched. Okay, so we've got a couple of premises here that chain together. All right, and so I had a question that kind of came in chat about, is it possible for a prediction or a belief or something that even looks like a claim to be a premise? And the answer is yes. I would say this stage right here functions as a mini conclusion to this premise, right? Millions of households fast forward through TV commercials now, and so therefore, I believe television commercials aren't watched as much anymore. But this line is also used to eventually support the larger conclusion. Okay, and so sometimes, in a describe the role question, this line or this line right here might act as like a conclusion that's not the main conclusion of the argument, right? It's kind of a mini conclusion or an intermediate conclusion. But here's like the chain of logic here. We've got about 7.5 million households are fast forwarding through commercials now. The advertising executive then says, that must mean TV commercials aren't watched as much as they used to be, right? They're not as widely watched. And therefore, I'm arriving at my final conclusion, the end of this logical sequence. It must now be that television commercials are less cost effective. So again, what we want to do in a strengthen, weaken, assumption family question is just try to figure out how these arrows don't necessarily lead to the next step in the chain. Okay. So I'm going to say we want to focus on kind of these logical arrows. So does anyone have any ideas for how we could kind of attack these or say, hey, I don't think this advertising executive's really got airtight logic. We want to try to poke some holes in the executive's argument. We try poking a hole in either one of these logical connections. Okay, there's some good ones. And I could tell like some of these, some of your suggestions, I mean, a lot of times on these problems, I do like to do the analysis before we look at the answer choices, because I think a lot of times people look at the answer choices, if they know the answer, they're like, oh, that's going to be what is problematic here. Yes. Yeah, these are good. Cool. All right, I'm going to focus on this one first. Okay. So one answer came into chat, which I think is pretty good. And it's like, well, what if the people that still watch the commercials, right? We know, okay, yeah, a bunch of households skip the commercials now, I guess. I'll give you that. But what if the ones that do watch the commercials are now like more intrigued by them, right? The ones who you still have watching the commercials, like the impact those commercials make is greater, okay? That would be a potential kind of problem we have with this argument. And so a way to strengthen the advertising executive's argument is to say, oh, no, the people that are still watching the commercials, they're not more impacted by the commercials. It has the same impact as the ones who watched it years ago. Oh, another one came in. These are good. So I'm getting a lot of suggestions. I don't think I'll be able to get to all of these, but like, what if the current TV commercials, yeah, they're watched by fewer people, but they cost less to run, right? So yeah, maybe you lost like 50% of your viewership per commercial, but the commercials cost 50% of what they used to run. That would be a legit problem with this argument. So to strengthen the advertising executive's argument, you'd say, oh, and the commercials are just as expensive as they used to be, or something like that. Okay, these are good. All right, so I had a number of suggestions about this first one, right? Millions of households fast forward through TV commercials now, and that means TV commercials aren't watched as much anymore. What if before people could fast forward through commercials, what if they just zoned out when the commercials were on anyway, so they weren't paying attention, right? Based on the data here, it seems like this question's really old, because I feel like now it's got to be something more closer to 100 million households have the ability to fast forward through television commercials. But what if, 10 years ago, when the commercials were on, people just, were on their phones or something and waiting for the commercials to pass? Okay. Yeah. So a couple ways we would want to tackle these, but in general, what we want to do is consider the gaps that these arrows kind of cover and kind of press on those gaps. Okay. So let's actually go back and take a look at the answer choices here. If that helps, you can update your answer in the chat. Okay. If you feel good about your initial answer, what I'd like you to do is try to find two answers that actually have kind of the opposite impact on the advertising executive's claim, right? Can you find two answer choices that actually might weaken the advertising executive's claim? All right, so I have I have a couple in chat here, and someone was very strongly under the belief, I lost my cursor here, but someone was very strongly under the belief that answer D weakens. Yeah, I had a handful of people here. Tyler called it out. Tyler said definitely weakens it. John says D weakens it. LN says, yeah, D's a weakener. Kunal says D weakens, and Flavia says D weakens. Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. D weakens. Okay. Because what if you said this? The cost effectiveness of TV advertising isn't actually based on how many people watch it, right? The entire advertising executive's argument is like, oh, we have fewer people watching, right? Television commercials are now, they're not as widely watched. We have fewer people watching. And D's like, well, actually, that doesn't matter at all for cost effectiveness. It's not based upon how many people watch it. It's based on the appropriateness of the demographic. And so D gives reason to kind of cast doubt on what the advertising executive's saying, right? Remember, if I can go back here. Oh, can't do it that way. Television commercials aren't watched as much anymore, and that's why they're less cost effective, right? If we say, actually, number of people watching has nothing to do with cost effectiveness, that's going to hurt that logical chain. And D does that for us. So D weakens. The other one that weakens is E. And awesome if you said both D and E weaken. Congratulations. Yeah, that's really good work. Many companies find it difficult to determine the return on investment for television commercials because we just don't really know how to measure it. Yeah, so if we can't really determine return on investment, how do we know if something's less cost effective? Okay. I say both D and E cast doubt on what the advertising executive's argument is ultimately saying. All right, so there's one of these that strengthens it. I think two others are irrelevant, okay? I'm going to say that answer A is irrelevant. Answer A is irrelevant because this is about an alternative to commercials, and the argument itself is only about commercials. Commercials aren't as good as they used to be in terms of cost effectiveness. That's what the advertising executive's saying. Yeah, the commercials just aren't doing it for us as well as they used to before. It's not saying we should get a replacement. That would be a different argument. Okay, and so A is what we would say outside the boundaries of the argument. The entire argument's about television commercials, and A is like, well, there's another thing we could do. Not appropriate here. And the other one that's irrelevant is B. All right, television programs preferred by consumers without digital recorders are the same as those who have the ability to skip the recordings. B is trying to show that the people with DVR or whatever, the ability to skip commercials, they have the same interests as the people who don't. And what we want to do is somehow talk about the past with the present, not all the same people who have this technology now. Okay, and this is what C does. All right, C says back in the day, people didn't leave the room. People just watched the commercials. Okay, and that's what we need to have happen. All right, so let's go back and relate it to this arrow here. One way to kind of press on the logical gap here is to say, well, what if before people just didn't watch the commercials when they were on, right? They couldn't skip them, but they just like took a little 30-second nap or whatever. This would be an objection to the argument. So a way to strengthen the argument or shield it from some objection would be to say, oh, those people did watch the commercials back in the day when they were on, right? We can strengthen the argument by saying, oh, yes, before you could fast forward it, everyone was just watching the commercials. And that's what C says. Yeah, television viewers did not switch channels, leave the room, or avoid watching commercials. And if they did not avoid watching commercials, then they watched the commercials. And now that makes the advertising executive's argument a little bit stronger. Doesn't mean it's airtight, but it does shield it against one possible objection. Wow, I do not know how hard this problem is. I wish I could tell you. I didn't look that up. It seems fairly tricky because I think answers D and E do get chosen a lot. And I think one thing you'll notice, one thing to definitely be aware of as you're studying strengthen and weaken the answers is a lot of times the trap answers are answers that do the exact opposite. It seems like we should avoid those. You're like, that's the exact opposite of what I want. Of course, that's wrong. But it's very easy to get kind of turned around in the argument and figure out what are we actually supposed to be doing. And D and E definitely address something in the argument. They're not irrelevant. They just address the argument the wrong way, right? So the answer here is C. Another way to kind of check if a strengthener is the right answer is imagine the advertising executive saying answer C. Like put answer C. Put answer C somewhere in the argument. Like right here. In the past, people who watch TV always watch their commercials. But now, millions of people can fast forward, and they do. Yeah. I don't think so. C does not. I'm getting something in chat that says C weakens the claim. No, C strengthens the claim. C definitely strengthens the claim. This says TV viewers did not avoid watching commercials. That means they used to watch commercials. And that goes along with the argument that says, and now they don't. And so now commercials are less cost effective. We can come back to that later, but I don't think you're going to change my mind on that one. This one should definitely be answer C. All right, let's go take a look at another one. I'll give you a couple minutes here. Yeah, this one's a little too timely, huh? It's been a minute 20. You guys are gonna find out the answer soon. I can't tell all 80 of you what the answer is like in real time as you're chatting to me. All right, that has been 2 minutes. Let's go break this down. Which of the following, if true, most strongly suggests? All right, so we are going to look for, looks like a strengthener. A strengthener that what? So now we have to go find the conclusion or the claim. And this one's a little bit different because the conclusion of the claim is not actually in the paragraph up top. It's right here. Right? This is why we sometimes want to read, when we want to read the question before we go look at the paragraph, is because a lot of times it tells us what the conclusion is that we're trying to strengthen or weaken. And so the claim here is that, yeah, these medical exams will not help curb the spread of tuberculosis in country X. Yeah, putting all these medical exams in place won't help control the spread of tuberculosis. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out why, right? Why will these medical exams not help control the spread of tuberculosis? Okay, there's no reasons that have been given. Now, we've been given some facts. We know that the number of new cases in country X is going up. Right. We also know that the media speculates that it's because country Y had like a huge outbreak last year. Okay, and that's why country X's numbers are going up. Okay. And then all of a sudden, health officials are saying we need to make everyone coming in from country Y to have a medical exam. And what we're trying to do is say these exams won't work. These exams are not going to help control the spread. And now we need to justify why. Okay. So what would do it? Like, what if they give medical exams to everyone coming in, but then they just don't enforce any rules on people who test positive for tuberculosis? Or just like, oh, we're just doing this to track, but we're not actually allowed to prevent you from coming in, right? If they don't actually enforce the results of the medical examinations, then that won't help control the spread. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make everything about COVID, but like, what if, yeah, someone just gave me an answer related to that. Like, what if you're testing for COVID, and if you test positive, they're just like, okay, well now you know, but you don't need to quarantine or anything. Like, then maybe getting tested won't actually help curb the spread. Okay. Yeah, what if the exams don't work? Like, what if all the exams give like false positives and false negatives, and like, you know, the exams are totally unreliable? That might do it too. Yeah. All right. So what we're going to do here is, I think, get rid of answer A, because answer A is about country Z, and we want to know why having these medical exams in place is not going to affect country X. Not really sure what country Z has to do with this. Okay. It also sounds like country X is like doing well over here. And we're trying to show why country X won't get better. So really not sure how knowing option A would strengthen our argument that country X is going to get worse or not get better. B, current medical technology is not capable of detecting all carriers of tuberculosis. That is a tough answer choice. That is a tough answer choice. Okay, but let's relate it back to COVID. Maybe I should have picked a different question. But you know, people go get tested for COVID, and it's not 100% accurate, right? But it has decent accuracy, and that is helpful. Okay, so what if we can detect 99% of carriers of tuberculosis? I think that would help curb the spread. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing here. Okay, and I think we want to be on the lookout for answers that and strengthen and weaken questions that like try to call out exceptions or outliers, right? Like answer B is kind of like some carriers might get through. Yeah, some carriers might get through. And like, I get what you're saying. You're saying that this isn't going to be perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect to curb the spread. Okay. It'd be like me saying, you know, in the game of basketball, the hoop's 10 feet tall, and therefore, the closer you are to the basket, the easier it is to score. So the taller you are, the more of an advantage you have in basketball. And then someone saying, yeah, but I know some people who are shorter that are good. I'm like, okay, like I get it. There are exceptions, but the trend is the same. And that's kind of what B tries saying here. Like, well, you won't get everybody. It's okay. If it works a little, it still is going to help curb the spread. Yeah, these don't, when B kind of just tries to make a distinction between like 100% and 99%, and it's like, well, you're missing a few people. That's generally not going to be a good enough answer in strengthen and weaken. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Curbing to reduce the spread, or curbing the spread does not mean the same thing as getting rid of it entirely. Yeah. Thanks, Robin. That's a good one. All right, C, country X does not have the resources to examine all visitors from country Y. Again, like even if they have the resources to examine most of them, I think that's helpful, all right? The other thing is they don't currently have the resources to, but maybe they can get them in a bit, okay? So I don't think C is as good as one of these following answer choices. Answer D is the right answer. TB is not spread through human contact. And that kind of gives us as a reason why scanning all the humans who come in from country Y isn't really going to help, right? You're not going to get new info if tuberculosis isn't spread through human contact. So you're kind of wasting your time scanning all the country Y people coming in. And then answer E, citizens of country Y will not travel to country X if the proposal is implemented. I don't know. I think actually that weakens the answer. Or excuse me, yeah, that weakens, has the opposite effect as what we're looking for. If there's this test in place and people from country Y are like, oh my gosh, like that test is so annoying, I'm just not going to go there, then that actually could help curb the spread if country Y people aren't coming in. Yeah. F, I don't know what that means. Answer D is a false statement. Like is tuberculosis spread? I don't know enough about disease and things like that. I don't know how tuberculosis is actually spread. But we have to say, even if tuberculosis in real life is spread through human contact, you always have to be aware of the language in these critical reasoning questions. It says, which of the following if true? And so if it's true that tuberculosis is not spread through human contact, then that would suggest that the medical exams aren't going to curb the spread. Yeah. Not sure if that was what you were calling out there. All right, so I think we need to pivot to data sufficiency. I want to thank, again, I want to thank again the people who suggested some of these problems to look at today. Big picture, whenever you're facing a strengthen, weaken, find the assumption question in critical reasoning, we want to break down our argument into what is the conclusion and what is the support for drawing that conclusion. And then think about, in most cases, what's the problem there? What's the gap? Okay. For instance, in our very first example, it was about athletes who were under the age of 14, and then the conclusion was about Adrian. And we would have to assume that Adrian's under the age of 14 to effectively draw that conclusion. Yeah. Yep. I'm just trying to catch up in chat a little bit here. Yeah, I should also call out, here's what I'll say, most strongly suggests. So I know it says most strongly, and that leaves kind of open this idea that two of them somewhat strongly suggest, and then it's like a debate as to which one is stronger than the other. The GMAT does not like those types of debates, right? Because it gets very subjective there. Like, I think D is stronger than this other one. And like, then you have this argument that's unsettleable, right? And in quant, we know like the answers are pretty much like, you know, right or wrong. There's not a lot of debate there. And the GMAT does its best to get answer choices in verbal to be just as objective. And so even though it does say most strongly suggests, only one of these should really strongly suggest or suggest at all. And the other four should not. Yeah. A great point here that's coming in chat. Like, again, like even if tuberculosis is spread through human contact, and again, I have no idea what the case is. I studied music, so I don't know a lot of these things. We have to go by the rules of the exam. It does say which of the following if true, and if it were true that tuberculosis is not spread through human contact, then that's not then these medical exams are not going to work. The thing that came in chat that I really liked is on the quant side of things, sometimes you kind of test your own numbers, like you pick values in data sufficiency, or you choose smart numbers and in problem solving questions. And sometimes you can assign like numbers that don't really make a ton of sense in the real world. Like a store's revenue last year was $5. Like that store is in a lot of trouble, but sometimes $5 is a perfectly fine number to see if the problem works. Okay, so we're not always thinking about like real life in these problems. That's often how we can get stuck in these problems, is we bring in too much information from, you know, outside of the GMAT. That happens a lot in reading comp. Yeah, happens a lot. Sorry. Yeah, if people, someone just said, Tyler's cracking me up today. Tyler's saying like, yeah, if I was an infectious disease doctor, I wouldn't be taking the GMAT. So yeah, and same here. All right, let's go ahead and pivot a little bit. So again, thank you to JD and a couple other people who said they really wanted to think about critical reasoning a little bit more. I hope you found that a bit helpful. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead, and we're going to do something a little bit different here, because I had a couple questions related to data sufficiency overall and some specific problems that came in. So now for something completely different. This is from one of the official practice exams, one of the first two, so it's free. Go ahead and take a couple minutes here and think through this one on your own, and then I'll talk through how I would think through it. About a minute 15 here. That's 2 minutes. I'll give you a little bit more time because I do think this problem's a little bit of a monster. All right, it's been 2.5 minutes. Let's go ahead and end the suffering here. All right, so this problem immediately evokes concepts of divisibility, right? We see what's the remainder when something's divided, and in both of the statements, we have the words remainder and divided. So at some level, this has to do with division and number property. Okay, if you don't really know how to get started thinking of the problem kind of from a theoretical point of view, I think the next best place to go is to try picking numbers. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to try picking values for P and N. Those would probably be good. We're going to pick some values for P and N that satisfy statement 1. We're going to try it for statement 2, and then if we have to, we'll try it for both of them at the same time, or until we get tired of this and we figure out something else to do. So we are going to start with statement 1 first, because I see no reason why we should start with statement 2. But if you wanted to start with statement 2, I wouldn't fight you on it. What we need to do in statement 1 is pick values for P and N so that P plus N leaves a remainder 1 when you divide by 5. All right, so let's get some values in here. I'm getting some values. Chipsy has said P plus N could be 6, 11, or 16. Those are really, really good. We'll call those out in a little bit. A couple other ones I'm getting are 9 and 2. All right, let's go with those for right now. Let's go with 5 and 1. And I see what we're doing with the 9 and 2, which is extra clever, I think. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on the 9 and 2 for a little bit, and Kunal, I'll come back to it later. We'll do 5 and 1 and 4 and 2, because here 5 and 1 add up to 6, and that indeed gives me a remainder of 1 when I divide 6 by 5. So I'm going to say, oh, this is a valid set of numbers, and it should work with 4 and 2 as well. These are valid. All right, so P can be 5 and N can be 1. In this case, what is 5 squared minus 1 squared? Well, it's 24. And 24 divided by 15 leaves me something with a remainder of 9. Remainder equals 9. I'll move this bar over a little bit. On the other hand, in the second case, if P is 4 and N is 2, let's go ahead and plug that in here, right? Thanks for the quick math. 4 squared is 16, 2 squared is 4. So this becomes 16 minus 4 is 12, and 12 over 15 gives me a remainder of 12. And so statement 1's not sufficient because I don't know what the remainder is. It could be 9, it could be 12, it might even be able to be lots of other things. And so I will say statement 1 is not sufficient, right? Whenever we have a value question, what is the remainder? This is a value question. If we get 2 potential values, and we have 9 and 12 here, we know that the information thus far is not sufficient. Yes, okay, so Sumi, I thank you for that. Let me go ahead and, actually first let me go ahead and white box the answer choices so I have a little bit more room to work with statement 2. Yeah, I think that's something worth bringing up, and let me show you how to address it. So Sumi has said that it looks like 5 and 1 will work. Sorry, that needs to be P minus N. It looks like 5 and 1 are going to work in statement 2 as well, because 5 minus 1, p minus n would be 4. And when 4 is divided by 3, we have a remainder of 1. So we'll say these are valid. Okay. But Sumi is saying that 4 and 2 will not work. And that's absolutely correct. But it was totally fine to use over here because we were only worried about statement 1. Remember, in data sufficiency, we look at statements on their own first. Okay, we want to make sure we always look at statements on their own first before combining them. And so 4 and 2 is a perfectly valid combination for PNN in statement 1. You're right, it doesn't work in statement 2, so we'll get rid of it. But it's totally cool to use in statement 1. All right, and this is where I think Kulnal's second numbers are going to be really, really good here. All right, so p squared minus n squared over 15, that's going to be the same here. 24 over 15 leaves a remainder of 9. And now I need another set of values that works in statement 2. Okay, and another set of values that works in statement 2, what could it be here? Any ideas? 7 and 2. I don't think 7 and 2 is going to work. 7 and 2, we can check it. 7 minus 2 is 5. 5 divided by 3 does not give us a remainder of 1. So this is why we always check our cases. 3 and 2. I like 3 and 2. 3 and 2 is good. 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 divided by 3 is 0, remainder 1. And so that is valid. And now we'll plug it in up here. 3 squared minus 2 squared. So 9 minus 4 is 5. 5 over 15 gives us a remainder of 5. And now statement 2 is insufficient because again, you have 2 different values. Guys, so this process is long, okay? And I think we might even be able to see that this process is really long before we get too far in here. Okay, and so for me, I probably wouldn't pick numbers on this problem because I have enough experience to see that like this is going to be such a pain in the butt. But sometimes you just have to do enough of these and practice kind of arriving at that aha moment when you're like picking numbers is really, really hard. So this problem is just going to be time consuming if we do it this way. Let's go ahead and finish it off and see what happens if we can make these work for both statements 1 and 2. And so we already have a number that works for statements 1 and 2. We have 5 and 1. And I think this is where, yeah, at this point, it's like throw in the towel and pick answer C or answer E. That's totally fine too, right? You have 50-50 shot at this point, and it's okay to cut your losses. At this point, you could try picking values or finding another set of values that works for both. We already found 5 and 1 works for both. And the other one that came into chat a while ago, I think was 9 and 2. 9 and 2. And so if P is 9 and N is 2, right, that's 11. Sum 11 divided by 5 gives you a remainder 4. If P is 9 and N is 2, their difference is 7, and 7 divided by 3 leaves you a remainder of 1. So now you could try it with 5 and 1 and 9 and 2. We know in 5 and 1, the remainder is 9. What about in 9 and 2? This would be 81 minus 4, which is 77. And 77 divided by 5 will give you 15 remainder 2. And so even when you combine these, it's still not sufficient. Yeah, for the person who sent me this problem, I hope he or she's here. I don't think there's any shame in getting a problem like this wrong because it is pretty arduous to move through. I think what we want to do in a problem like this is just make sure we have like really clear structure when we're testing cases and don't feel bad if we kind of get stuck. So the other thing that we could do in this problem is to recognize that we're given a difference of squares structure, right? And this is P plus N times P minus N. And what you could do with this is then kind of, so we've rephrased this question a little bit into P plus N, P minus N divided by 15. And the other thing we could do with statement 1 and 2 is try to rephrase what they're really telling us. So what statement 1 tells me is that, and I had a bunch of answers that came into chat for what like P plus N could be, and they were all 1 more than a multiple of 5. So what I'm going to say is that P plus N is a multiple of 5. and then plus 1. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll save kind of the same thing for statement 2, except I'll say p minus n is equal to a multiple of 3 plus 1, right? When we divide by 3, there's a leftover of 1, which means it's 1 more than that perfect multiple of 3. And here what we could do is then rewrite this expression in terms of a multiple of 5 plus 1 and a multiple of 3 plus 1. So let me just see if I can capture all that and bring it down. So this is equal to, I'll call it M5 plus 1 and M3 plus 1. Okay. Hopefully this kind of makes sense with what we have up here. And now when you FOIL this, well, your first term becomes a multiple of 5 times a multiple of 3, which is a multiple of 15. Your outer term becomes a multiple of 5. Your inner term becomes a multiple of 3. And then your last term becomes plus 1. And now the question is, like, does this have a consistent remainder when divided by 15? And I know that this is always a multiple of 15. A multiple of 5 times a multiple of 3 is always a multiple of 15. But then everything else does not combine to give you something solid. And that's going to be the case. Yeah, because these multiples of 5 and multiples of 3 are rather random. And so because this is very much unknown, that's why this is not going to have a consistent remainder. Otherwise, being able to do that is pretty tough. The testing cases is rough. Yeah, we can get lucky. We can get lucky by picking good numbers, but I don't know. It's hard to rely on luck here. I think actually, unless you're aiming for like a 48 plus in quant, like this could be a problem you just look at and be like, yeah, I don't really want to do this one. I'm going to save my time. I'll just pick my favorite letter and move on. Yeah. I think this is a 700 plus level question. Good. Let's do one more. Let's do one more here. And I know I'm not going to get to all the questions that came in, but I might be able to kind of rattle off a response to someone based on one that we didn't answer. Let's try this one. This will be the last one we do today. Take a couple minutes and think through this one. Oh, the answer to the last question was E. Sorry, I did not make that explicit. The answer to the last question was definitely answer E. After we do this, after I give you another minute or so here, I'm actually going to go back to the previous one and build on a topic because something came up in chat that I want to address. Let's spend just over 2 minutes here. You're welcome to keep working on this one. Ideally, like you have it written down at this point because there's not a lot of text here. But I actually do want to go back to the previous problem quickly because something came into chat and I wanted to address it. Let me alter this question a little bit. Let me see here. All right, if this question were now changed to something like this, this is solvable, okay? Because what we could now do, I'm just gonna kind of update the language in here to match the new question. Yeah. What we could do now is actually say, oh, if p plus n is 1 more than a multiple of 9, and so is p minus n, then actually what I could do in here is, well, first I have to be able to rearrange all this stuff. Here we go. I would FOIL it out now and get something like this. And now what I know is that this component is always a multiple of 9. This is always a multiple of 9, and this is 2. And so that tells me that this entire piece is a multiple of 9. And then when I add 1, I'll know, oh, this entire expression is just 1 more than a multiple of 9. And so now when I divide the FOILed through version of p plus n times p minus n, I would have a remainder of 1, this extra 1, when I divide it by 9. So there is a way to kind of use this if the problem were a little bit different and actually see sufficiency, but in the original form, doesn't work. All right, back to this one. So in this problem, I think what we want to do is avoid the temptation to immediately pick numbers. Like, yes, you can solve this, I think, by picking numbers. And if you pick numbers in a correct way, and maybe you get a little lucky with some of the numbers you pick, you can get to the answer reasonably quickly. But what I think is important to recognize in this problem is the question is about X, and the statements have nothing to do with X, right? They're about A and B. And so what we have to do is kind of connect that. We have to connect over that chasm here and rewrite X in terms of A and B. All right, so this is going to be a classic rephrase. All right, the question is about one variable, the statements are about the other variables. Maybe we should get the question to be about those variables. So what we can do here is say, oh, AX equals negative B, and then say, oh, X is equal to negative B over A. And so now that the question asks, is X positive? That's asking, is negative B over A positive? Well, how can negative B over A be positive? In a sense, that's asking if normal B over A is negative, right? And maybe you could already see where this is going. But in order for B over A to be negative, you would have to say, do A and B have opposite signs? And now we should be able to see, like, oh, if negative B over A is positive, then yeah, they would have to have opposite signs for that to work out. This is what this question is really asking. So this is the move to rephrase this question in terms of the variables that you're given information about. So do A and B have opposite signs? And that like could now save you a little bit of time, like plugging in numbers, right? So now when you're plugging in numbers and you're like A plus B is greater than 0. Let me see what just came in. Yeah. Okay, let me see if I can adjust that in a little bit. All right. A plus B is greater than 0. Do A and B have opposite signs? Can I get them to have opposite signs? Can I get them to have the same sign? Like, what if A is equal to 3 and B is equal to 2? Those are valid because they sum to something positive. And the answer here is no, they do not have opposite signs. On the other hand, what if A is equal to 3 and B is equal to -2? Well, they still sum to +1, so their sum is greater than 0. And now the answer is yes, right? They do have opposite signs. So I guess I don't know if they have opposite signs yet. This is going to be insufficient. I'll get rid of answers A and D. Yeah, then we'll go look at statement 2. There's already some information coming into chat. I'm giving the, yeah, I think you're right. All right, so A minus B is still greater than 0. Okay, so let's see if we can plug in some values that do this. A is 3 and B is 1. Those are valid. And the answer is no, right? They don't have opposite signs. And then A is 3 and B is -1, right? We don't have to pick really fancy numbers here, just ones that'll get the job done, right? 3 minus -1 is +4. Those are valid. And now the answer here is yes. Insufficient. Answer B is out too. So I think a lot of times people get like hung up on data sufficiency problems when the answer is not A, B, or D, because it's like, oh, this is so hard. I have to like do more and more steps. And you do really earn it when the answer is C or E. I will tell you that. It seems like you've earned it more. And we're earning it here. These are just a little bit more time consuming. So what do we do together now? What can we do together? If you say so, that's good. Yeah, what can we do together here? Well, something that came into chat, which I liked, the question is if you can add these. And yeah, you can add these as long as the inequality signs are in the same direction. So all we're going to do is just add these up and cancel out the B's. And we can say 2A is greater than 0. And that means that A is greater than 0. So A is positive. So then the question becomes, well, if A is positive, is B negative? And so we just have to pick values that satisfy these where A is positive and B still has options. And I think statement 2 already does that for us. Like the cases we picked here actually already work in statement 1. And so all of this stuff together, all of these values in this box actually satisfy all the statements. And you can still see that we don't know the answer, right? And so we can take credit for like previous work as long as it's valid. And because A was positive in both of the cases in statement 2, and B can be positive or negative, this is a perfectly fine set of cases to try for both of them combined. So again, answer E here. Believe it or not, in data sufficiency, answer E is right about 20% of the time. It does feel like you earn it though. Yeah, it does feel like you earn it when you get there. Whew, that was a lot. Let me see if something came into chat here. Yeah. Cool. All right, I'll stick around and see if you guys have any other little questions right now. Yeah, those were good questions. Those are hard. I mean, and again, these are not problems I made up. These are problems you had. I think I'm going to try to do that a little bit more. So if you sign up for my hours a couple days in advance, I'll try to email everyone on the list and just see like what people would like to work on. And depending on how many people respond, like I won't be able to get to everything, but sometimes I can find some common themes. So hopefully the people who gave me questions here found this a little valuable. And even if you didn't give me questions, I hope you still found it valuable. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and yeah, thanks, Kate. We're going to go ahead and shut things down formally. So there are a couple questions that are coming in chat that I want to get to, but I will go ahead and say if you want to hang up, like feel free to do it here. Thank you guys so much for coming. Okay, so Mo had a question. I do want to get to that, I think. And then Sumi had a question on the on the first one, and I know you don't agree with me, and that was a little contentious, but I'll see what we can do here. All right, so but while we have this one up, Mo had a question about dividing by A, because we're not sure if A is negative or not. And I think that's a very, very value, or not if A is negative, if A is 0 or not. Is that what you had said? Shouldn't really matter if it's negative because we're not dealing with an inequality sign here, but if A is 0. Okay, let me see if we can figure this out. All right, so I think I can clean this. Actually, let me just clean up some of it. All right, so I actually am very glad Mo called this out because it's not something I really paid attention to, but this is only allowed if A is not 0. If A is not 0, then what this means is you're allowed to divide by A, and X would equal negative B over A, which we kind of like went that pathway. So then we have to set the idea of like, if A equals 0, right? And if A equals 0, then what would that mean? That would mean A times X equals 0. And B equals 0, or negative B equals 0, right? And so basically you're saying, oh, if A is equal to 0, then B is equal to 0. And that would be impossible in both of these two statements. So that would tell you that A is not 0 here, and A must not be 0. And then these are the only cases you can test. So actually, Mo, I'm very appreciative that you called that out because that was a step I went over, and it could have gotten me in trouble, but it doesn't here. And maybe I got a little lucky that it didn't. Very much appreciate you calling me out there. Good stuff. Yeah, A ends up being positive when we combine them, but Mo was saying like when I initially rephrased and I got X is equal to negative B over A, I'm actually not allowed to do that if A is 0, right? You can't divide by something that's 0. And so I kind of jumped the gun on that step. Yeah, it ends up like a little bit later, you figure out, oh, A has to be positive, but we hadn't gotten there yet. Right. Ooh, what level is this problem? Geez, I don't think this is a 700 level problem. I could be very wrong. I could see it being difficult, not because of the content it tests, but because of the time involved. Yeah. All right, great. Thanks, Mo. All right. Okay, I want to entertain Sumi's question because there's a lot of conviction behind that question. So, Sumi, let me go ahead and let you take the lead here. So, what we said, and I don't remember if you were here for when we broke this down, but I am standing by answer C, and there is some disagreement on your behalf, which is fine. But I am saying that answer C here, which basically says in the past, and there's a typo here. This should say television viewers, not viewer, but television viewers. Apologies for that. Viewers watched the commercials, right? They did not avoid watching, means television viewers watched all the commercials, okay? And so that addresses this potential gap, right? Millions of households fast forward through commercials now. And so that means people aren't watching commercials as much. And that assumes that everyone back in the day was watching the commercials when they popped up. And so answer C strengthens the idea that like, oh yes, people were watching the commercials years ago. So answer C doesn't address this gap, it addresses this gap. And we're trying to potentially, in this question, strengthen either of the potential loose gaps here. Yeah, so it doesn't, like, we don't have to strengthen the second one in particular. We're strengthening the entire chain of reasoning. Sometimes that chain of reasoning is only one link, but in this case, it's multiple links. So a lot of times you see this on critical reasoning problems that are like involving plans, right? And like, you know, some executive has a plan and there's like this goal at the end. It's like, in order to hit this goal, we need to do this first step. And the first step should lead to the second step, and the second step leads to the third step, and the third step leads to the goal. And actually, like, all of those connections between steps could be problematic. And so as long as you can attack one of them, you could weaken one of them to weaken the whole plan or the argument. All right, so let me see if I can say this a little bit better, because it's definitely not getting through. So I apologize and try to do it better. All right, so what I care about is this. I don't care about this so much, okay? I care about this mini argument, okay? Yes, you can strengthen just this link and strengthen the entire argument. All right, so in this mini argument, so we'll call this mini conclusion. Millions of households fast forward through TV commercials now, so TV commercials aren't watched as much anymore. Okay, some possible objections I have with just this mini argument would be, well, what if, even though you lost, we'll call it 7.5 million households to commercial skippers, like, what do we call this? Digital video recorders, fast forwarding ability, TiVo, you just call it TiVo. You gained an additional 80 million TV watchers total, or 80 million TV watching households total, right? So this would potentially like poke a hole in this mini logic, right? You're like saying, oh yeah, 10 million households have, you know, these TiVo machines and 75% of them skip commercials. So like 7.5 million households skip commercials. Okay, but what if you have like another 80 million total TV watching households? So like the net gain there is 72.5 million commercial watching households, right? So this is a possible objection I have to this logic, right? And if I can break this logic, then you can't say commercials aren't watched as much anymore, and then you can't really say that commercials are less cost effective, right? So if I attack this part of the argument, it ruins the big picture argument, right? And so there would be ways to like, you know, shield against this and be like, well, actually, you know, we didn't gain nearly as many TV watching households as we lost to TiVo. Okay, and that would be a way to, you know, defend against this possible objection. Okay. So the one that's pertinent in this question is, what if all the people who now have TiVo just left the room whenever a commercial came on before they had the technology, right? And so those people who you think you lost to TiVo, like, they weren't watching the commercials anyway, right? They just ran to the fridge to get food, or they like, you know, pulled out their phone and started like scrolling on their phone, or they just like weren't watching the commercial, okay? And so the way to address this what if question would be to say something like this. All those, thank you guys, all those people who now have TiVo, who now have TiVo, were watching the commercials when they were on in years past. And so effectively what that's saying is like, yeah, you really, like TiVo really did cost you business, cost you watchers. Okay. So what I'm doing here in blue is I'm showing a possible like objection to this argument or something that kind of pokes a hole at the logic. And the answer in red here is a way to say, oh, yeah, your rebuttal in blue doesn't work. Okay. And so red has the function of tightening this gap. Okay. Because it refutes a potential problem with the argument. And this red thing, yeah, all those people used to watch commercials is what C says. In the past, the television viewer didn't switch channels. They didn't leave the room. They didn't avoid watching commercials. So they watched the commercials. And that's why C is a strengthener here. Yeah. So I can't tell, Sumi, if you're still kind of like saying that this is the argument, but okay, good. All right, it sounds like we're on the same page. Thank you, thanks for your patience there too. Woo. Yeah, did not switch. This is how they really confuse you on these, right? Like the double negative, right? Did not avoid. That means they watched. It's like, it's really annoying, but this is how they write these answer choices because they know they're going to get people turned around, and that's often what makes these very difficult. Oh, well, Sumi, you're doing really well. I would just keep studying. You're on a very good trajectory here. Very, very good. All right, guys. I think we're going to call it here because I need to go eat. But I wish you a Happy New Year. Thank you so much for watching. Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2021, which I think will be the best year ever. Yes, 2021. Get me a new planner. All right, guys. Thank you. I'll see you later. Jesus, the answer was C to that commercial question. The answer was C.